It's such a pleasure to be hosting you today, Mark, on this conversation series called Insightful Leadership Conversations. Um, I know you are the president of such a wonderful group like the Talent Strategy Group. You are an alumnus of Yale, and you consult the largest and for the most beautiful organizations in the world. So really very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Meena. It's my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Lovely, lovely. So we know so much about Mark on the web, but what else should we know as people? What is the other side of Mark, and what does Mark enjoy doing?
Oh, there's not a lot of the other side, but the little that there is, what do I enjoy doing? Well, before what has hit the world, my wife and I used to be big foodies and like exploring restaurants. Where I live right now, we can still get out a little bit, so we're starting to revisit restaurants, which is great. I'm a bit of an exercise fanatic, so I'm in the gym 4 to 5 times a week, and I practice Muay Thai boxing as well, which is a very good way to stay sharp, because when you normally exercise, that's fine, but then when someone takes a swing at your head, it causes you to think more than you used to think. So you realize, okay, you don't always have to be on offense. Sometimes you need to think about defense as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, Mark, you're so passionate about the talent management space and performance and human resources. What is it that ignites your passion in this space and stay committed at it?
Sure. I really believe that our organizations, whether you're in a corporate, NGO, no matter what you do, are the fundamental force for good in society, meaning this. If you work in a well-run company, then that company is going to hire more people. It's going to pay healthy salaries. That means we're going to create stronger families. If we create stronger families, that will probably lead to stronger communities, stronger regions or states. But none of that can happen unless that company is well run. Poorly run companies destroy jobs, they destroy individuals, they destroy families. And so I look at our organizations as really being the starting point for so much good, but it only happens if we do a lot of the things that you and I work on every day. We do that well.
Beautiful, beautiful. So that's such a wonderful insight into how talent really extends beyond organizations and touches communities, which is a wonderful way to look at talent. And it's a huge responsibility on any talent leader for sure. So, Mark, you've been in this space, and I'm sure that you have observed a lot of inflections, a lot of changes over the years. And what do you think are the top three shifts that you observe that organizations really need to take note of?
I think there are a few things. I think probably the first shift is the power of employees, meaning 20 years ago, if Mina was hiring, I would beg Mina to get a job. I really want to work for your company. I'm the right guy. Please hire me. In many places around the globe, that's completely shifted. Now, Mina needs to tell me why I should work for her, because if I have the right set of skills, there are 20 people who want to employ me, and some might pay more than Mina does. The equation has shifted that organizations need to sell employees much more. What's the holistic experience that they can promise? That feels like one big shift. I think the expectations around managers as talent builders has fundamentally shifted, in that before, if your manager had the right mindset and the right kind of disposition to manage people well, that was great. We appreciated that. But if someone didn't manage well and maybe they screamed at people occasionally, well, that's just the way they are. Completely shifted to the fact that we now look to managers as being the starting point for engagement in our organizations, and that bad managers are far less tolerated around the world than they ever were. And I'm not sure what you see in the organizations that you work with, but I have found the behavior standards have gone up and up and up, where not only is it that bad behaviors aren't allowed, but we're very clear about which behaviors differentiate success, and we expect our leaders to engage in those. So I think another fundamental shift has been saying, managers, your job is not just to get stuff done. That's important. But your job is to elevate the quality of talent in your organization. You are stewards of the people we have placed in your charge. And your job is to build better quality people than entered the door originally. I'm going to stick with two because I can't think of a good third one. So I'm going to stick with those two. That it's that brand, that companies need to really build that strong brand to attract the best talent. And that once talent gets inside those organizations, that we've really increased the accountability of managers to manage them as a valued resource that we want to have be productive and engaged. Maybe a third one. I thought of a third one just around purpose and the driving power of purpose. I think we've always known that people wanted to sign up for something more, but maybe as employers, we weren't as explicit as we could have been about, here is our purpose, here's what we stand for, but also recognizing that purpose doesn't need to be something grandiose. It doesn't need to be, we're going to save the world. I work with some pharmaceutical companies who are going to do exactly that, and that's a beautiful thing. But maybe you work for a company that manufactures clothing. Okay, great. Well, clothing makes people feel good. You buy something, some new fashion, you know, that's purposeful as well. We want to make people feel good by providing them great opportunities to look good. That's an absolutely fine mission. So I think mission has become far more important, and I am completely agnostic as to what that mission is, but be proud about that mission. Here's what we believe in, here's what we do.
Lovely. So in the gig economy that we are actually getting into, I hear you say that organizations need to brand themselves much more powerfully to attract the right talent. Managers need to provide micro experiences that are so critical for an employee to stay on with the organization, and the power of purpose that drives talent and organizations holistically. So well said, Mark, so well said. You know, you've been a proponent of simplicity, adding value in processes, and decluttering complex systems, designs, or processes. So tell me more about it. Why do you think we need to keep talent processes simple, and what are the derailers that you have experienced in organizations?
Sure. Well, let's go back to our earlier conversation around my view about the purpose of organizations. If that purpose is to do all the things we've talked about, run well, et cetera, we know that a lot of the HR practices that we implement work well if they're used, but they only work well. They only deliver results if they are used. Managers have good intentions, but they're very busy people. They have many other things to do. So while there's not beauty in simplicity by itself, there's beauty in making a practice unbelievably easy for a manager to use, so they will use it, so we will get the result we want, so that virtuous spiral will start to occur. So the beauty of simplicity, and we normally pair the term science with that, science-based simplicity, is that if we know that that feedback helps to improve behaviors, and Mina is Marc's manager, we're going to make it as easy as possible for Mina to do something that might not come naturally or maybe she doesn't feel comfortable with. Let's make it unbelievably easy for her to do it, because we know if she does it, then things will get better. But also, let's set a reasonable standard for that first step. I think sometimes in HR, we set our expectations at the 100th percentile. And we say, Mina, this is what coaching is. It has these 12 points, and here's a paragraph on each, and it'll take you years to learn this. Most leaders are going to be overwhelmed by that. Why don't we say, Mina, here's a starting point. Have a conversation with Mark once a quarter where you tell him you make 2 observations against his goals, and it can either be positive or things he needs to check in, not 2 against every goal, just he has 10 things to do, but offer 2 observations against his goals and give him 2 what Marshall Goldsmith would call feed-forward suggestions. So, Mark, here are 2 things you could do to be an even better leader or manager going forward. And Mina, that might not be the most brilliant coaching conversation, but that will give you a round of practice. And I'm going to guess the second time you have that conversation with Mark, you'll feel even more comfortable. Maybe now it's a 20-minute conversation. Third rep, so a lot of that, the concept around simplicity is, let's get you over the first step. Because once we get you over the first step, we can walk you to the second step. But if you never get over the first step, we're dead in the water. So simplicity has a lot of power in helping leaders who might not naturally feel comfortable at being great managers to get practice and recognize, okay, maybe it's not as scary or not as difficult as I once thought.
Lovely. So I hear you say that you are going to use science to design simple processes, practices, and talent, which will help leaders habituate themselves in doing those processes effectively. And that's where you see science tying in very closely to the processes themselves. Beautiful.
Yes, I think science is can be such a driving force in what we all do in this field, because there have been so many smart scientists over the past 50, 60, 70 years who have helped to solve the puzzle of how do people think and operate, how do companies operate, how do those 2 things operate together. A lot of the answers, or a lot of the building blocks to the answers that we need to help our companies are out there. We don't need to do massive benchmarking studies. We don't need to kind of create things from scratch. We know so much of what is already true about how to keep people engaged and productive and developing in organizations. If we start with that hardcore academic proof about how to do that, and then we translate it into the very simple practices that we just talked about, then you have a rock solid foundation, and you made it very, very easy to execute. So I'm a big fan of using that science, because the challenge on the other side is if we simply go with, well, what did that consultant say? Or I read a book, or I saw a TED Talk, or I read an article. Well, you don't know if those things are based on science. Maybe they sound compelling to you because they agree with Mark's worldview. Oh, I agree with what Mina said. She must be right. Well, no, we agree. We could both be wrong, or we could both be right. But we don't know if that's based on science or not. So I like to start with the science, because we know, well, it's not 100% guaranteed to be right. A lot of the science has been tested and tested and tested. So we're relatively confident that you can rely on the conclusions.
And what a way to summarize the connect between data, logic, and building talent itself. So thank you for that wonderful insight. So going forward, Mark, we know that the world is shifting. It's going to become, or is already, extremely digitalized. How do you think HR and talent folks should really shape themselves up to welcome this new world? Because we're not going to survive without it anyway.
There are probably a few opportunities, and they might not be in the most obvious places. I think the opportunity that I would have thought would have come much more true over the past 10 years is individual technology, meaning things like there's a cool app on my phone that helps me to manage better or give feedback. And I think we were all very excited about that 10 years ago. In fact, I partner closely with a firm in India on a lot of work, and we were working together on a really cool app to give fast and easy feedback. And we just thought, well, of course people are going to use this. It's fast, it's easy, it's based on one-page talent management. And it just kind of did nothing, because it goes back to, we can make things really easy for people. That doesn't mean they're going to do it. So if we're thinking that we're going to use kind of those individual pieces of technology to help managers manage better, then we need to build in more accountability for still doing it. You know, if you never held me accountable for giving feedback, the fact that you now gave me an app to give feedback doesn't make me do it any more effectively. So I think that's the side I've been a bit surprised it hasn't taken hold more. Where I think we need to focus more on the digitization, and where I think some of the lift can be, is really in AI and big data helping with what I call decision support.
Yeah.
Now, decision support to me is Mina gets an email and at 7:46 in the morning, because the system knows that's when she first checks her emails, and it says, Mina, here are your two key people management tasks for today. You need to speak with Shruti. Shruti has been in her role for 30 months. She's a high potential leader. Normally we move our high potential leaders at 28.5 months. So, and we also know that Shruti worries a bit based on her personality profile. So she might be concerned that she's been in her role for too long. And here are 3 new roles that we have found in the system that she might be eligible for, that because we're working at a big company, you might not know about. And we have calculated that the best role for her is this one. So, Mina, you need to go to the coffee station at 9:21, because we know that's when Shruti gets her coffee, and meet her there and have a. That to me is decision support. That is saying there's so much data that we as managers are never going to be able to process. But if someone could crunch that, they could help us to make decisions and interact with people in ways that we might just never otherwise guess. And not that the system should give us orders. Hopefully we won't get to the point where we're simply slaves to the computer, but that I'm never going to know that at this point in time, this person needs this intervention. The system can at least flag that for us. We don't have to do it. Maybe we've already done it. We don't believe in it, but it can at least say, we're going to crunch all the data to be able to help you as a leader to make smarter decisions.
Lovely. And I read this so much, and I was so fascinated in your one-page talent management book that said provide as much data to managers to help them take the fastest and the best decisions. And I think now you're saying use AI very powerfully for the same thing, such that it becomes very easy. Lovely. So, Mark, you have been talking about something called a personal experience map. And I was fascinated to hear those terminologies, and I would love you to explain that for us, please.
Sure. Let's start with this. We are relatively confident, meaning we HR researchers, that most of how we grow is through the experiences that we have at work. And while education is certainly very important, I always use the example, I'm very glad that my personal physician went to medical school, but I'm more happy that he's had 20 years of practice. If he had only gone to medical school, then he's not touching me. So experiences are incredibly valuable, and they help us to grow very quickly. But some experiences are more valuable than others. And what I normally help organizations do is start with let's call it a functional experience map, meaning if you want to be a great finance leader, here are the types of experiences within finance, not necessarily jobs, but experiences. Close the books at the end of a quarter. That's an experience. Now, maybe you're in a particular part of finance where you do that, or maybe you are in a special project, but that's an experience. That's a building block in your career. Or something more technical, calculate international tax obligations. But these are all kind of, think of them as resume value chunks of experiences that are building blocks for a career. So my starting point is at the organizational level. Let's think through that as a company. What do you need to have a great career in? IT, in marketing, in sales, in R&D. Which experiences do we as an organization value the most to make it more clear to every employee, here's what matters most. So let's start at the organizational level. Now to your question on the individual level, then I, hopefully talking with my manager, have a conversation to say, well, for me personally, given what I've already done in life and given what I'd like to do going forward, and as I look at this map, which experiences matter most? Because what you should want to do as an individual, if you're managing your own career, you should want to grow as quickly as you possibly can, quickly and as successfully, but as quickly as you can. And that means you're in the right experiences for the right length of time. And that's always a bit tricky. There's no precise definition, but you should be thinking 3 and 4 experiences forward. What's the next best experience to accelerate my career? Great. After that, which 2 experiences feel like they might be the right next choices? How do you find out what the right experiences are? Well, if you're in a company that does something like experience maps, great. Not all companies do that. The other way is simply lots of conversations. Go one level above you, talk to people, especially people who know you well, and say, I'm trying to figure out how to grow as successfully here and as quickly as possible. Here is what I ultimately want to be. I want to be CFO. Now, what experiences do you think are going to be helpful for me to have along the way? And use those leaders, and even leaders outside your company, to help you create that personal experience map so you feel comfortable. It might not be perfectly linear. It might be that there's some optionality along the way. Maybe I could do this or I could do this. I think both could add to my career, but you have a plan. Because the challenge for a lot of people is they don't think experiences, they think jobs. Well, what job would I need? What job would I need? Jobs are becoming much less valuable than experiences. You can have 12 experiences in a year. You can't have 12 jobs in a year. Hopefully you don't have 12 jobs in a year. And so your job should be to collect experiences, collect successful experiences. Think of it as your resume is getting longer and longer and longer with things that people care about. That's probably a key consideration. Not, I've done a lot of stuff, Mina, but I've done a lot of stuff that you as a prospective employer really, really value. So personal experience map is simply your individual plan for what are the next 4 or 5 experiences that I plan to get to move myself forward faster.
Beautiful, beautiful. So it all talks about shifting your gaze away from only roles to really seeing what experiences those roles could actually have, which will take you to possibly a different role or a higher role or a different role altogether. Fantastic. So, Mark, you've been working with the world's finest organizations, and you would have, I'm sure, experienced several organizations which focus on building high performance teams. Now, what has been your experience, and how do you differentiate these organizations from the others? What makes them different?
I think there are a few things. I think it starts with even recognizing that the team as a unit is different than a combination of the 5 people. So a team is not simply these 5 people added up equals a team. There has to be something more. There has to be, it's 5 and I get more than the number 5 at the end of those 5 people. I get 6. How do I get more from that team? So I think before we simply said, well, a team is 5 people, for example, showing up and doing a job, as opposed to the sum of those parts should be greater. So as basic as that sounds, I think a lot of organizations are now recognizing the interplay of individuals should yield a bigger more complex, more valuable result. But also understanding better, the organizations who do this well understand how each individual contributes to that team. So maybe I'm all about ideas and you're all about risk management. Great. Those two things should go together well. But in the meeting, if we don't understand how I show up and how you show up, we might not like each other because I'm all about here's idea one. You're like, well, I'm not sure. Here's idea two. Well, let's think about it. And I'm thinking she's getting in the way of every single idea I have, as opposed to us understanding each other very well at the beginning of the team to say, hey, Mina is a little more skeptical. So while she's going to be open-minded, a great role she can play in this team is she's going to test us, make sure we've thought through these ideas so they aren't half-baked. Just because Mark has 20 ideas doesn't mean they're 20 good ideas. So helping the team members to understand what's the unique value they each add and how they're likely to interact with other members of the team. Because that's when high performing teams start to emerge, is when we understand each other well enough to know that Mina may care very much about the ideas that I'm suggesting, but she has her risk management hat on, and she's not going to let a bad idea get through. I think organizations who are managing teams well also are managing the incentives around teams. So how do we make sure that we are measuring not only team outputs, but individual outputs? And how do we reward for that? It used to be if I did my job well, I got my bonus. Well, let's say I'm in a team that did a brilliant job, but I was a free rider. I didn't try very hard. Do I get the team bonus or do I get what I did individually? Or let's flip that on its head. The team failed, but I actually genuinely did everything that I should have to make the team successful. How does that calculate? So I think companies are doing a better job at thinking through how are we evaluating performance when it might be very diffuse. Was Mark's suggestion in the meeting the one that accelerated the conversation or got in the way of the conversation? How do we kind of assess those contributions? But I think the starting point is companies recognizing that teams are not just a collection of individuals. So there needs to be some incremental value to bringing these 5 people together, more than simply adding up their individual skills, helping those teams to understand how to work well with each other, and helping them to understand how will we be recognized and rewarded as a team, not just as individuals.
Lovely. So I hear you say that teams should be complementary to each other in terms of what they bring to the table. Every member should complement each other. And second, organizations should design rewards that recognize and ensure that individual contribution is valued when people are part of teams. So that's definitely something that organizations need to think a lot deeper, because I think I see divisiveness in this in most organizations, and that's such a brilliant insight. Mark, you've spoken a lot about the high performer mindset. I would love to ask you, what have you seen in high performers that's very different from the others? And how do organizations focus on identifying high performers and high potentials?
Sure. The high performers mindset, I write about this in my most recent book, 8 Steps to High Performance. And in that book, I talk about what does the science say is proven to help people be higher performers at work. But I start by describing the fact that none of those elements are going to matter unless you have this mindset that I have found consistently around the globe, every industry, every country. I work everywhere. I found a very consistent mindset, 3 pieces to it. The first is this recognition, high performers work more than other people do. Just flat out, they put in more hours. Now, sometimes people get very mad at that suggestion. And I hear things like, well, Mark, I work smart, not hard. Great, you'll work smarter and harder than other people. Because the challenge in saying I work smart, not hard is that suggests that because your work smart, somehow you're going to be so much more effective than the other smart people around you who apparently are working dumb. But that's probably not true. You probably work with a bunch of other smart people who are trying to be just as efficient as you. And sometimes when people say they're going to work smart, what they say are things like, well, in the old days, I'm not going to hang out at the coffee station with people, or, I'm not going to be that person who's chatting with their colleagues in the, in the car park. When in many cases, that's called socialization and building relationships. And so part of the challenge is, let's say that Mark only wants to work 40 hours a week, Mina wants to work 50 hours a week. In those additional 10 hours that Mina works, maybe she is learning something new about our industry. Maybe she's building some relationships. Maybe she's coaching other employees. Maybe she's just putting more time in on a project. Those 10 hours every single week over time are simply going to add up to you having better odds, not guaranteed, but better odds of you delivering more. And part of being a high performer is simply delivering more. So the first part of that high performer's mindset, I'm probably going to have to work harder than other people. Second is, and related, I'm probably going to sacrifice things that I might otherwise want to do to spend more time at work. We all have the same 24 hours allocated to us every day. High performers are going to dedicate a little more of that time to work than they might dedicate to seeing their favorite sports team, or engaging in their favorite hobby, or even spending time with their family. Back when things are going to get better, a lot of us will be back on the road more. They recognize I'm willing to sacrifice some of that because I want to demonstrate high performance to my organization. And high performers, the third part, high performers recognize that it's always going to be a competitive world. I'm not just competing against myself. There are people in other industries trying to do the same thing that I'm doing. So I'm always competing against the best person out there, and I need to feel comfortable with what level of competition I'm willing to engage in. But until I'm willing to recognize I'm likely going to work harder than others, I'm likely going to sacrifice some things I'd rather be doing, and I'm always going to be competing with people to prove that I'm the best in my particular function or industry, that has to be the core of high performance. Because if you flip that on its head and say, I'm not going to work that hard, I'm not going to sacrifice that much, and I don't really care if I come in first, second, or 12th, probably not a great foundation for high performance.
Beautiful, beautiful. That really probably gives high performers much more gusto and confidence that they're doing some things right. When people tell them, don't work so hard, they're going to say, no, Mark said, I have to work hard. Lovely.
And it's funny because I was actually in some LinkedIn discussions over the weekend, and I probably get involved in too many of those, where someone posted something about, we need to stop pretending that working hard is something like glorious. And I wrote back simply saying, look, some people are happy to put in many hours. One person might put in 50 hours and be exhausted by it. The other person might put in 50 hours and be absolutely engaged by it. The science is very clear that it's not hours that cause people to be burned out. It's lack of interest in the job that causes people to be burned out with many hours. If I work 60 hours on a project that I love, I might be tired, but I will think that was a really cool 60 hours. But if I hate that task, yeah, it's going to lead to very bad outcomes.
That's a different insight altogether. Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's a very challenging question that's been on my mind for a very long time. When it comes to performance feedback, I've seen the smartest, toughest leaders melt away and don't really want to give tough feedback. What has been your experience in this, and why is it that this happens?
Let's start with the fact that we are hardwired mentally to get along with others. The kind of the core of being a human being is to be social for all the obvious reasons. It's, in our brain stems, if I cooperate with Mina, she's less likely to kill me. So, that's a good thing. So we are hardwired to get along and cooperate with others. So starting something that may feel like we are threatening someone else causes a lot of brainstem activity to say, that's not a good thing to do. Mina might not like you. Mina might react in the wrong way. So it's not natural to give people feedback.
Mm.
It's natural to help people. So if I see you stumble, I'll pick you up. But that's different than pointing out something that I think you could do better. So let's start with, this is not a natural set of behaviors, but let's also go to, it is a needed set of behaviors. The science is unbelievably clear that when you give people feedback or coaching, they improve at the task.
Mm.
Now, people are a little bit more resistant to behavioral feedback, but still most of the time it works. So we know that it works. We know that our brains are hardwired against it. I think there are a few challenges, or there are a few maybe opportunities. First is, to our earlier conversation, can we make this potentially difficult task easier for managers to engage in? So can we take some of the fear out of it by either giving them an easy process, an easy tool, making everyone involved in the conversation kind of understand why we're doing it? Are there ways to lower that fear barrier so I don't have as much trepidation walking into that conversation as I should? I think there's a lot that we can do on the HR side to relieve that stress. I think, though, also we need to build in the accountability piece, which is consequential accountability. Mina, if you coach and give feedback to your leaders, here are the good things that will happen to you here at ABC Company. If you choose not to do this, here are the less than good things that will happen to you here at ABC Company. But in many ways, or in many cases, it's about asking that leader, do you care enough about your team members to give them this insight? And I use the example, let's say you're driving with your father down the road. Your father's driving, you're in the passenger seat. And you see the car start to veer a little bit towards the side of the road. At some point you say, hey, Pop, you're kind of going to the side.
Mm.
How many times would you simply let your father drive off the side of the road and say, well, I didn't want to get involved, and you know how to drive, and I don't want you to be upset? You would never do that. So if we care about people, at some point, maybe it's not the moment it goes a little bit, but at some point you're going to say, hey, I think you should probably straighten out a little bit. And it's then up to the other person if they want to take that in a positive way or a negative way. But you are expressing from a point of care and concern. I think you're going to be more successful driving if you keep it on the straight and narrow and aren't driving off into the ditch.
Right. I think that summarizes it so beautifully. It's more about, I love the analogy of the driver. I think I will never forget it in my life. If I fail to give feedback, this will give me a bump and say, no, do it. So thank you for that. And it also kind of leads me to the thought about, it's not about what you give feedback about as much as it is about how you give feedback as well, right? I think the way we put it across as leaders may help the person to understand it a lot better. Don't you think so, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that is, and I'm a huge fan of Marshall Goldsmith, so I'm a big believer in this feed forward methodology, which means rather than tell Mina, oh, in that last meeting, you walked in with a 40-page deck and that's way too long. I could simply say, Mina, the executive team loves 3-page decks. For the next presentation, 3 pages is probably perfect. Now, in the back of your mind, you might be thinking, is he saying I walked in with too large of a deck in the last meeting? But I'm not critiquing you. I'm not saying you did something wrong in the past. So I think part of it is framing that that you can do even better, and that this is coming from a point of genuine interest in your being wildly successful. Mina, I know that you can continue your great track record in this company. One thing that I think is going to allow you to do that even more effectively is this. And that's whether that is saying, kind of coaching, do more of this, you'll be even better. Or, Mina, you might want to take a left turn instead of a right turn because I know that you can be wildly successful if you do that. We tend to get defensive as individuals if we feel critiqued without care. But similar to that car driving analogy, hopefully the person recognizes, oh, now I understand. I would have driven into the ditch. The reason she said that is she cares about not only you, but herself as well, and we want to go down that road straight together. So I think if it comes from that point of care and concern and even love. I had a podcast last week with a company called Love as a Business Strategy. That's the name of the company, Love as a Business Strategy. And that's very much their mindset. If you genuinely love the people you work with, of course you would care enough about them to give them that type of feedback and advice.
Beautiful. How different the organization is. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So it all is relating back to the full circle of us being humane. And I think love as a business strategy relates to that in some way, perhaps. So now that we're moving more towards a gig world, what are your thoughts about how organizations should prepare for this kind of talent that we never envisioned a decade ago?
So gig implies transactional, and transactional implies that all of the things that we've been working on for the past 20 years in terms of engagement and great managerial quality and incredible experiences might not be as appropriate for some subsegment of the workforce. It might be that what do we need to be great at? We need to be great at onboarding people, because if Mina's going to be here for a year, we don't have 6 months to onboard her. We have 1 month for her to get fully up to speed on who we are. So let's transactionalize things like learning our culture, learning our systems, learning our people. How do we get her and anyone else who's a gig worker like her up to speed more quickly? I think it's going to be one key challenge. Just the branding around the experiences that you get. Why should Mina come work for me at ABC company? Mina, let me tell you how many great experiences we give our gig workers, A, B, C, D, E. So I'm going to need to be able to sell our organization in a way that just doesn't only attract people who want to be here for 15 or 20 years, but people who see their life as a collection of great gig experiences. How do I sell that as a way to attract you into the organization? And then also, I think finally, clearer metrics once you get in. I work with a lot of organizations around the world. Most are not good at all at goal setting and evaluating. And if you're only here for a year, we need to be very crisp and very clear. What is that Mina is going to achieve so we can evaluate and compensate her fairly? We need to do a much better job at getting crystal clear about the deliverable, about the measure. And because you're only here a year, I, as a coach, I'd better be really good at ensuring that you're staying on that straight and narrow path.
Lovely. So you talked about crisp goals. You speak about a faster learning agility that you need to build in people. And you also spoke about experiences that the organization can have for the gig worker to make him come back for more. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
So, Mark, that brings me to the last question for today. You've been speaking about high performers who work tirelessly more than others at the cost of something. And so, if I were to give you a choice of being a high performer with less time for your family, and or not being a high performer but very happy in life, what would your choice be?
Well, I think my choices have changed as I've aged, as I would imagine many others have. At some point in life, hopefully that satisfaction curve will start to level, and you recognize one more unit of work is not going to equal one more unit of satisfaction. So at some point in your life, it's the equation is flipped, that one more unit of work will be even more than one more unit of satisfaction. I think I'm probably starting to get to that point where I'm saying, while I love what I do, I'm still incredibly passionate about it. Am I going to put in 80 hours Probably not. I still do 55 to 60 a week, and that's about, that's about right. But there are times when I think, oh, right now I could be starting another article, or right now I could be reading something I should read. And I think, okay, you can get to that tomorrow, get to that the next day. So I think for each of us, it has to be a very individualized choice. Some people may get to that curve in their 20s. Cool, that's great. Some people may never get to that. That's great as well. I think even to the point of your question, Mina, we need to be self-aware enough to understand what is that balance. And that silly statement of having it all is exactly that, is a silly statement. You cannot have it all by any conventional measure of those terms. So pick out how much of each you want, and create that right balance, and be okay with your choices.
I saw such a deep Mark today, very, very deep when it came to understanding life, being self-aware of the choices, understanding organizations, talent, people, performance, goals, gig workers, and I think the list is endless. It was such a pleasure talking to you, knowing you better, and I would like to thank you so much for taking time to share with the audience what you really, really think about talent and transformation. Thanks once again.
Thank you, Mina. I very much enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate being on with you today.
Thank you. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day, Mark. I shall stay in touch.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.